Hello and welcome to the next session and plenary session of the Netting Union. Today is the 22nd of May 2020. I am Speaker Rorschach, and with me I have the right honourable members of this House, the Prime Minister and his cabinet, as well as interested third parties. Today's session will begin differently than any other session. With that being said, the Chair would like to actually inform the House that on like this day today, on the 22nd of May 2017, an Islamist extremist suicide bomber detonated a shrapnel-laden homemade bomb as people were leaving the Manchester Arena following a concert by the US singer Ariana Grande. About 23 people died, including the attacker, and about 139 were wounded. More than half of them were actually children. Several hundred more suffer psychological trauma. The bomber itself, a Libyan, a 22-year-old man with a Libyan ancestry, died as well during this session here. After initial suspicions of a terrorist network, the UK police later said that they believed that the specific bomber had largely acted alone, but that others have been aware of their plans. In March 2020, following up the brothers' original terrorist attack, their brother as well, Hashim Abedi, was found guilty of 22 counts of murder in relation to the attack itself. This incident, which occurred within the UK border, was the deadliest terrorist attack and the first suicide bombing in the United Kingdom since the 7th of July 2005 on the London bombings. Today we will be holding a minute of silence in remembrance of the fallen. Thank you. With that being said, a minute of silence is actually commended and concluding this case here, and we are ready to open today's House of Business. With that being said, the first presenter will be the Right Honourable North Cheshire in the House of Motions of the 22nd of May presented by the government. I will be posting a link directly under the Parliament, and with that being said, Right Honourable Member Cheshire, are you available? And are you able to take the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead.
I would like to thank you for the memorial, and I would also like to quickly also pay tribute to Fusilier Lee Rigby, who was brutally murdered in London 7 years ago to this day also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The motion I commend to the House reads as follows. This House, noting the horrific terrorist attack at the Manchester Arena 3 years ago today, stands in solidarity with the families of the 22 victims killed and extend its deepest sympathies to all those who were affected in the tragedy, whilst also noting the heroic efforts of the emergency services in their response. I commend this statement to the House.
The floor is open. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his motion today. I think it is worth noting that terrorism is an evil scourge, and that unfortunately, particularly when children are targeted, the loss of life can be so tragic. I see the member is quite emotional, so I thank him for taking the time to propose his motion, and it is my pleasure to be voting for it this evening, as much as pleasure can be extended when remembering such a sad and tragic state of affairs. I also note the member mentioned the abhorrent murder of Fusilier Lee Rigby, and I thank him for that as well. And I wholeheartedly support the comments the member made in regard to the bombing in Manchester and the tragic death of Fusilier Lee Rigby. I note that in considering this motion, the House is considering a real world issue, and I think that despite that, it is important that this House does support the motion before it tonight. Motion number 3, essentially, as was pointed out to me by my colleague Angry Beeland, speaks of the heroic nature of the armed forces, the emergency services, and ordinary people in the defense of a country against those who would do it harm. And it is when we have a democracy and when we have the ability to speak our opinions and the ability to be free, and the people are willing to lay down their lives in defense of that against those who would take that away. So I commend the statement.
All right. Honourable members of the Parliament, the floor is open for discussion, and if you wish to make your opinions and voices being heard, please, you may raise your hands. The Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland, the floor is yours.
Well, you're very quiet, Pete.
Yes, the microphone is not actually working.
It happens every time to Keith.
Okay, you may write your statement until you fix your microphone. Until then, yes. No, you may chat in the Parliament channel. Thank you. Until then, the floor is open for anybody who wishes to raise their voices and make their voices known through. Okay, and we already have one of them. The Right Honourable Member, Secretary of State, Exodius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say that I commend the spirit of this bill and would like to push for more recognition of real-life events, even if it is merely as an observance within the online nation-states community. I fully recognize the fact that there are a lot of events in the real world which are exceptionally important and have personally affected the lives of many of the individuals who are here and other Canadians, and so I just would like to say that this bill is definitely a step in the right direction in achieving that goal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary of State. The floor is again open for further members' comments and open for discussion, pretty much. Anyone else who wishes to take the floor? I know that the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland actually want to type in, but I don't see them typing.
It says as it says, Angry Beeland is typing.
Okay, he's
I think it's best,
fixed.
Mr. Speaker, if the member.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you, Prime Minister. I will be returning to the motion and to the discussion of the Right Honourable Angry Beeland if he wishes to actually make their voices and their opinions heard. Until then, though, I cannot delay the proceedings of today's House meetings. For that reason, we will be moving to the same House motion of the 22nd of May and motion number 1, which I was led and made aware that is going to be presented by the Right Honourable Member Orange Main. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to present motion 1 regarding the amending the election bill.
You mean calling the election?
Yeah, absolutely. You may go ahead.
Yes. So, the House recognizing that the requirement for the elections of the monarch of Canada to take place in a timely and efficient manner does mandate the Government of Canada and Electoral Commission to schedule the monarch elections to take place as mandated by the Scheduling Act of 2020. The House recommends that polling occurs on the 30th of May 2020, with results declared on the 31st of May 2020 to allow the smooth transition of power should a need arise on the 1st of June 2020.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm simply copy-pasting technically the House presented so we can actually reflect what we're actually discussing right now also on the Parliament channel. With that being said, it is no need for me to actually make aware and actually make everybody aware about the situation that we're currently facing. The discussion is open and the floor is open for discussion. You may raise your hands so we can proceed, and Right Honourable Member Ravenwood, welcome back. Yes, the floor will be moving to the Right Honourable Cheshire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to thank the government for bringing this motion from all the way down the ice. I think given that the motion is simply to enforce the law, I would like to beg to move that the motion be immediately put to a vote.
Yeah. Second.
Okay, we have a second in this case here. So the first motion, number 1 of the 22nd of May, motion is up for a voting process. You may go ahead and cast your votes. I see you all are using the new emojis. That's great.
Fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Quorum.
I believe that with 9 votes, indeed, we have reached and exceeded the actual quorum in this case here. The first House of Motion and motion number 1 of the House of Motion of the 22nd of May 2020 is officially passed within the Indian Union and this House of Commons. We will be moving now to motion number 2, again of the same House of Motion of 22nd of May 2020. I would like to actually copy and paste the actual motion before we proceed. Mr. Angry Breland, if you wish to make your basically your opinion heard about the third motion, now is the appropriate time before we escalate it to an actual vote. And I was made aware that the second motion, it would be presented by the Honourable Member and Secretary of Roleplay, Mr. Austria Carentia, standing in...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I'm listening.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
The point of order will be made after I've actually concluded my initial thought and process of thought thinking in this case here.
I do believe that the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland has used unparliamentary language in the Parliament channel.
I am
Is
aware
that
of
really?
that. I am aware of it.
Okay.
Order, please. Right Honourable Member Cesar, I'm fully aware about what is going on because I mean, last time I checked, I can still see what's going on with my eyes. I was trying to actually present, in this case here, the second House of Motions, which will be presented by the Right Honourable Member Austria Carentia, standing in the Right Honourable Member Sidonia's place. With that being said, I believe that we are capable to actually address the unparliamentary language used by the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland. Of course, if you allow us to. I'm kidding. In this case here, we're going to be moving to the second point of order today. And please, Mr. Austria, you may go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This motion was proposed by the Honourable Sidonia MP, and it states the following. This House, recognizing the great progress made in the Canadian roleplay, congratulates the Ministry of Roleplay and the members of the roleplay community. This House further encourages citizens of Canada to join the Canadian roleplay and participate in this great Canadian project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Thank you as well. I will be moving the floor to an actual debate and discussion in this case here, and the floor will be moving to the Right Honourable Old Ravenwood. Then we will be addressing the parliamentary language by the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland. Mr. Ravenwood, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this House, I would like to unofficially second that motion about the roleplay. While I may not be an active participant in it at the current time, I have been in the server and I see that has become active, has been a great source for many Canadians to participate in. And again, the Ministry of Roleplay deserves to be commended for this, and I completely support this motion to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you. The floor will be moving to Mr. Helvetorius, the Right Honourable Member Helvetorius. I'm not sure whether they're going to be taking over the floor using their microphone or they're going to be typing. I will assume that they're going to be typing. With that being said, Right Honourable Member Cesar, you may go ahead. In regards always to the second motion presented by the Right Honourable Member Austria.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I would like to echo the words of my honourable friend, the Member of Ravenwood, VRP is so far proving quite successful despite some personal ups and downs that I have personally had with VRP. I would just like to thank the Minister, the Prime Minister and the roleplay staff for the superb job that they are doing with running VRP. And I too would like to commend the statement to the House and beg to move that the motion do be put to a vote after the Honourable Member Helvatorius has spoken. I yield the floor.
Thank you. The motion will be still open for discussion in case anybody else has to make any comments in this case here. And I'm looking towards the Executive Cabinet at the same time. I would like to also point out and actually read the response by the Right Honourable Member Helvatorius, which I'm thanking for taking the time to type in their actual response. They are stating, and I'm quoting, they say, as an avid member of the roleplay, given my nuclear disaster, some of members here are no doubt aware of, in parentheses in this case here, and closing it. I would like to unofficially second this motion, as I have had a great deal of fun with this unique experience. Thank you. With that being said, I'm going to be moving the floor to the Right Honourable Member and Secretary of Roleplay Austria. Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank all of the members supporting this motion to recognise the great efforts of the Ministry of Roleplay and the roleplay community. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you as well. Well, I think that concludes. Mr. Cesar, do you really need to make another statement?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Okay,
We
sorry.
just beg to move.
Yeah, my mistake. I had scrolled up in order to copy and paste the actual motion, and the last thing I could see was the Right Honourable Member's raising hand. With that being said, the floor will be moving to an actual vote right now, so you are able to cast your votes, and I see you have already done that. 4 ayes, 5 ayes, and it goes, and it goes. Quorum has been reached.
Quorum, Mr. Speaker.
I'm aware I can count. Yes, and indeed, we have actually reached and exceeded the minimum quorum in this case here, and the second motion has actually passed. Now, I would like to make basically a small statement in regards to the unparliamentary language used by the Honourable Member Angry Beeland.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
One moment, please. In regards to the actual statement in this case here, it is an unparliamentary language, and whether it is actually considered essential or non-essential by any members of the House, it has to be retracted. Mr. Prime Minister, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to note that despite the member's choice of words, I think the member is frustrated, but I think we can all agree with the content of what the member said, despite the need for a correction of choice. I recommend the member choose perhaps a word that is similar in meaning, but not as vulgar.
Yes,
Yeah.
in this case here, I'm totally in agreement with the Prime Minister. As I said, whether it is a fashionable or unfashionable statement, it is again unparliamentary, and it is actually not supported even by the laws that we currently have. So I would require and request, basically, right, the Honourable Member Angry Beeland to either change their wording or delete it entirely. The Secretary of State is wishing to take the floor. Yes, Mr. Deacon?
Mr. Speaker, quick point of order, Mr. Speaker.
In this case here, the Secretary of State and Homeland Affairs has actually raised their hands, so I'm going to be allowing them to actually take the floor. Then we will discuss the point of order.
It's
Thank you.
just that the honourable member who you have
Please,
asked to either
order, please. As I
also
said-
wishing to speak.
As I said,
The Speaker.
order. We have the actual Secretary of State who wished to take the floor, and then we will be moving to the response by the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland. Let's respect the order and hierarchy of, the raised hands in this case here. Mr. Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to actually support the statement that the member on Angry Beeland said. He may have used unparliamentary language, but I think it should be dismissed on this occasion, because I agree with the sentiment of what he said.
Thank you
Mr.
so
Speaker.
much. The Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland, you may go ahead.
Doesn't work.
It's...
Or trying, go ahead.
Alright, point of order, yep. I'm gonna be bearing with you, no worries, buddy. Yeah, go ahead. Mr. Cheshire? Point of order.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to ask that if, now that we have concluded with motions 1 and 2, if the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland wishes to make a full statement with regards to the third motion as he raised his hand. If he does not, I'd like to ask that members be given one more chance to say anything else, and if not, that we move to a vote on the third motion to the House.
Thank you. All Ravenwood. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Well, Angry Beeline just did it, so, yeah, if this issue is resolved, Mr. Speaker, I no longer require the floor at this moment. I yield my time.
Okay, thank you so much. I will be reading the response by the Right Honourable Member Angry Beeland. In this case here, they apologize for the choice of words earlier. They were under severe emotional distress due to the fact that my recent purchase doesn't work. May I amend my statement to stay fragile terrorists? That is accepted by the chair, and I believe that under all reasonable thoughts and opinions, I believe that the House is also accepting this sort of apology and retractment of their comment. Correct?
Of course.
Yeah.
Great. Well, with that being said, okay, the Right Honourable Member Lincoln was actually dismaying the first and claimed that the first phrasing was superior. Whether it was actually superior or not, it's still unparliamentary. Which, you know, a motion which you voted in favor of in this case here. Alright, well, with
Mr.
that being
Speaker, I
said,
need not remind you of Lincoln's mistake when presenting the motion.
Here.
even better. I totally forgot about that. Thank you, Prime Minister. With that being said, I will be moving the third motion of in this case here, the 22nd of May 2020 motions up for, actually I think the debate has concluded, so it is up for vote. You may go ahead and cast your votes. Four votes, 5, 2 more to reach quorum.
Point of inquiry.
Um,
what are we eyeing? I had to step out for a moment.
Yes, we are actually voting on the motion number 3, which is the horrific attacks of Manchester Arena. And we've reached actually quorum. I'm just waiting for other members to vote until, and yeah, I believe this concludes the actual voting by the actual members. The House of Motions of the 22nd of May 2020 with 3 motions have already passed, and it is actually in effect from now on. Congratulations, everybody.
Here.
And we will be moving now, because I'm actually trying to save everybody's time here. We have a second, and in this case here we have a second act, which is called the Election Scheduling Act of 2020, which is actually an amendment. It will be presented. I was made aware that it's going to be presented by the Right Honourable Member and Secretary of Homeland Affairs, Mr. Lincoln. I'm posting a bill for reference and all relevance in this case here.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start?
Yeah, absolutely. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, we are moving on to one of my favourite topics, which is dissing the AOR, and we are now doing it in the form of an amendment, as we seek to repeal all previous legislation that is no longer relevant, as we have left the AOR. So, I shall now read out this short amendment for everybody. It's rather simple. The House, recognising the need to adjust laws and current legislation as a result of Anadia having left the Assembly of Regions, enacts the following. Article 4, as stated below from the Election Scheduling Act 2020, will be struck to reflect the political realities in Anadia having now left the AOR. So this is Article 4 in regards to the Assembly of Regions Councillor and the scheduling of that election. And that is, in short, what this amendment does, Mr. Speaker.
Short and sweet. I like it.
Here.
That was shorter than anticipated, because I'm actually reading here about 3 motions. Who's going to be presenting the second and the third one?
The
point of order for the parliamentary record, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry, you may. There is no need for you to be shouting in the microphone. Thank you. 1 second, because actually I was raising, I think, a very reasonable question to the Prime Minister. Who will be presenting the second motion and the third one, Prime Minister?
The Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs will be presenting legislation regarding the Foreign Obligations Review and the AOR legislation repeal bill. And the Secretary of State has presented the amendment to the Election Scheduling Act as stated under government time previously. So the next motion is the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs.
Okay, absolutely. And yes, you may go ahead, Right Honourable Member. I think I kind of messed up with the links there. Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to point out for the parliamentary record that you have, in fact, accidentally linked the House motions yet again, as opposed to the bill in question.
Point of order.
Yes, Prime Minister, go ahead.
I do believe the member, while I respect his keenness as being tedious, the Speaker was aware of his mistake. He previously stated it, and he did not require a point of order to that matter. So if we could make some progress and try to avoid bogus points of order, it would be appreciated.
If I may, Mr. Speaker?
No, we're going to be moving to the Right Honourable Member Ravenwood, who wishes to make a point of inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, I am a bit confused on which piece of legislation is on the floor right now. Is it the amendment to the Election Scheduling Act, or is this the legislation that would...
Absolutely, and you are correct for that. I apologize in advance, as I was actually, I had the impression I had the correct links, but I missed them up. I'm going to be actually presenting and actually copy and pasting the actual bill right now to the floor, so you don't need to worry about it. The actual bill that we're actually discussing right now is the Foreign Obligations Review and the AOR legislation repeal bill, in this case here, which I am posting now. The floor is not open for yet discussion, Right Honourable Member Cheshire. Has the Secretary of State, in this case here, concluded their presentation of this bill? And at the same time, is the Right Honourable Member Secretary of Foreign Affairs wishing to make any comments in regards to this specific particular bill?
Point of order.
Please, go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to say it, but you've got them confused again. The Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs is yet to present the Foreign Obligations Review.
Yes, I was presenting the amendment to the Election Scheduling Act.
I apologize, but the links which I'm having right now, I'm actually copy and pasting them directly from the newsroom, so that's why I was actually confused about it. Can one member Election Scheduling Act? Okay, I found it. Never mind. I'm sorry. I stand correct in this case here. And thank you, Kato, for presenting the bill. This is the actual bill that we're actually discussing right now. Mr. Ravenwood. Okay. The floor is open for discussion. Do you have a point of discussion, Mr. Cheshire?
I do indeed, Mr. Speaker.
The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to, before I make my statement regarding the bill, quickly point out to the Prime Minister, I was not intending to delay anything by any means. However, I raised my point of order and then the Speaker addressed it prior to my speaking. So I apologise if it was coming across as emphasising the Speaker's error. That was not intended in any way, shape or form. Now,
Make some progress.
Okay, I believe there is no need to actually apologise and extend our apology in this case here when we have an actual discussion open for the bill presented by the Right Honourable Members.
I'm moving on to my point regarding the bill now, Mr.
Thank you so much for being so kind. The Right Honourable Member Orange Main, the floor is yours, please. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, just one quick question that's related to parliamentary matters. Unfortunately, this session has ran over in the time that I personally need to get to work, and so unfortunately I cannot be here for the rest of the parliamentary session. So, how would I report to my intent to vote on the bills before leaving the parliamentary session?
I understand. I believe that in everybody's basically interest in this case here, the bill might be explained for 24 hours, so you can actually hear the parliamentary recording and at the same time cast your votes accordingly and make your opinions heard. Okay? All right, and with that being said, we will be moving to the Right Honourable Member. Mr. Cheshire, do you have another point of order before I move the floor to your...
I do indeed, Mr. Speaker.
What is that about?
I do believe I was wishing to, after making my quick apologies to the Prime Minister, wishing to move to a point regarding the bill. However, you cut me off, so I would like to please have the ability to actually address the bill as I intended.
Okay. Before we actually move to any addressing of the bill in this case here, I would like to actually hear from the Right Honourable Member, Secretary of Roleplay Austria, as they raise their hand. Please go ahead.
I beg to move the bill to a vote. Any seconds?
Second.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but in this case here, we have to adhere to the parliamentary proceedings, and we have 2 points of order raised, one by the Right Honourable Member Cheshire, and the second one by Old Ravenwood. Mr. Cheshire, since you actually have the hierarchy, because you raised your point of order previously and priorly, I'm listening. What's the point?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do believe that it is improper to be moving to a vote, and I would like to say that I'm not.
Order. I'm sorry.
Speaker, if I may finish.
Order, please. 5.
This violates House procedures. It's an invalid use of a point of order on the gentleman's part.
I'm sorry.
The bill has already
Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. Order, please. Order.
To move to a vote when it was aware that
No.
members were wishing to contribute to the debate on this bill.
Gentlemen, order, please. Despite the actual opinions, and I'm not sure why this is actually a very debated proceeding today for some reason, despite the Right Honourable Members and the Secretary of Roleplay opinion and the ability that has been provided by the Chair to actually state the actual bill was actually open for discussion. We had 2 points of order by 2 Right Honourable Members, who in this case here appear not to be either on the executive branch. With that being said, it is in the interest of the region, as well as the parliamentary proceedings and the democracy and liberties that we actually have in this session here and the Parliament, to actually have their points of order made heard. With that being said, Mr. Cheshire, have you completed your point of order?
However, I would like to ask that I be allowed to actually make my contribution to the debate on the bill, as I had intended, before the vote occurs.
Okay. I would require you to actually be calm during the proceeding in this case here, and I would like to make also the floor aware that despite how, in this case here, whether it is fashionable or unfashionable for some certain members to make their voice heard, they're entitled to their opinion and to be heard at the same time. Complete your point of order, because we need to move to the second point of order, which is presented by the Right Honourable Member Old Ravenwood. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, my point of order, I'm a bit confused at this point. As I've said, my point of order was concluded.
Well,
However,
then
I
sit
would like
down.
to then be able to be called after Mr. Ravenwood's point of order to actually contribute to the debate on the bill.
Order. You may assume your seat. Mr. Ravenwood, your point of order, please.
My point of order also refers to this topic of the Honourable Member Cheshire being cut off. He had stated that he was going to move to discussion related to the bill currently up in the Parliament chamber, as he said he was doing that. And then he was cut off, and even then he was cut off again, even though he had been made a statement before. So I would like to come out in support of my fellow honorable member to let him speak his mind on the bill, as the motion to vote was made when there are honorable members such as Cheshire that still have opinions on the bill that want to be heard. And as members of this House of Commons, we should ensure that all honorable members get their thoughts and opinions heard on any piece of legislation that comes forward. Thank you.
Thank you. You may assume your seat. With that being said, I will be moving the floor to the Prime Minister, who has raised their hand, and thank you so much, sir. You can put your hand down now. I don't want you to be tired. Go ahead.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wish to note on record for honourable members that in regard to the topic of the bill, we've had 6 points of order over the last 2 pieces of legislation from one singular member, who I will not name. I simply note that the member moved for a division in the previous motionary section during the debate. The Secretary of State is not out of order in doing so. In fact, he's quite right to do so, because the bill is simply correcting legislation. I can see no grounds whatsoever that the honourable member could give an opinion other than I agree with this legislation, because there is no grounds for disagreement. This is merely correcting legislation to ensure that the Canadian law is reflective of Canadian practices. I speak in support of the Secretary of State for Roleplay, who I think makes a valid point about the necessity of points of order. And I would encourage members to make as few points of order as possible, because when we have a continuation of points of order on a continuous basis in this House, it simply disrupts proceedings. This has taken us 46 minutes to get through 3 motions that should have taken 10 minutes and a one-line bill. And I agree with my colleague, the Secretary of State, that we should move to a division sooner or later, as the second piece of legislation up for debate tonight is more substantive. And we did plan to allocate more time to that, Mr. Speaker. So I do beg to move in second of my colleague.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Before we move to the raised hand by the Honourable Member Cesar, I'm going to be allowing the floor, first of all, to the Right Honourable Member and Secretary of Foreign Affairs, which I believe in this case here represents the voice of the Executive Cabinet of Ineria. And then we'll be moving to the point of Cesar, and that will be the end of further discussion of this bill, and we'll be moving to the seconded matter, which is the voting on this bill. Mr. Secretary of State and Foreign Affairs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to state that everybody here, I'm sure, can agree that we are busy individuals. It is a Friday evening. We most likely all have things that we need to get done. Work, personal things, hanging out with people, things of that order. And so I would just like to speak in support of my colleague, the Minister for Roleplay, the Right Honourable Austria, who has made the very valid point that these bills that have been presented are relatively minor, and the amount of time that it's taken to discuss these is, quite frankly, becoming a little obscene, due to the fact that we have other legislation that we need to get done that's of great importance to the Canadian people. And will likely cause much further and much more drawn-out, in-depth debate. So I would like to third the motion of the Prime Minister and of the Right Honourable Austria in order for us to move to a immediate vote on this bill.
I would request the gentleman to give way as to correct his statement.
If the Right Honourable Member Cesar wishes to give way to the actual voting and they wish to retract their ability to actually and their request to speak to the Parliament, then we will proceed directly to a vote.
I do not, Mr. Speaker.
All right, you may go ahead and state your opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst I am in support of the bill, I would just like to inquire as to why the bill, as amended, completely removes all reference to the elections for the Assembly of Regions, rather than simply having the bill stricken with the repeal text stricken through, so that it is no longer effective in law. However, it is still clear to citizens and the members of the Parliament as to what the bill previously.
Okay, order, please. As I did state, that was open for discussion and not for further discussion. Unless I wasn't being clear, this statement here will not be receiving any further responses, and this discussion has concluded. If you wish...
Speaker, I hate to say, though, that the Honourable Member has actually asked a question which I can't actually fathom of why. This is an amendment to the bill. Of course, the original bill remains in the Canadian parliamentary record. I would hope the member would be aware that previous legislation in Canada and repealed legislation is documented. This is an amendment to current legislation. There is no need for the current new version of the bill to state the provisions of the previous bill unless they are going to remain in force.
Okay, order.
I honestly think the member is just fishing for time here.
Order. You may assume your seat, Prime Minister. With that being said, I believe that there is no need to raise hands further ahead, because I'm not going to be leaving way to any further discussions on this specific bill. I believe that indeed I agree that the Parliament needs to have procedural proceedings in times of, in this case here, on the timetable of what we're actually going to do. With that being said, and this is the end of discussion debate, just to make everybody clear on that. With that being said, I have placed the bill up for vote, and you are free to proceed.
Oh yeah, I just remembered how.
I'm waiting for further votes before I push this to 24 votes, 24 hours voting again, which will be done in the forums in this case here, because we have too many
Speaker, the
bills.
vote should continue in the parliamentary channel.
That is correct, but the point is that we have several bills in this case here that, and 2 of them might be moved for 24-hour votes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 current basically ayes. We need another one to actually reach quorum, and 2
Mr.
abstain
Speaker,
votes.
we're in quorum because 2 members have abstained. Those members count as abstentions and vote tally, so that we've reached quorum in the amount of members considering the legislation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I believe that in this case here, this hasn't passed.
Well, it's got a majority. It's over 50%
And we have
of the
another
House.
aye. Alright, now it has passed. We have another aye by Mr. Everyone changing their vote, and the Election Scheduling Act presented by the Right Honourable Member, the Secretary of State, in this case here, and Homeland Affairs, Mr. Lincoln, has actually successfully passed in this case here. With that being said, I believe that we will be reaching the final presentation date by the Right Honourable Member Creeks, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. The actual bill is called Foreign Obligations Review and AOR Legislation Repeal Bill, and yeah, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this bill, the Foreign Obligations Review and AOR Legislation Repeal Bill, basically, this House recognizing the need for the removal of Assembly of Regions legislation from Canadian law and the need to withdraw from the nullified treaties enacts the following. Article 1, the repeal of primary legislation. The AOR One Passport Act 2020 and all connected AOR legislation passed by the AOR House of Delegates and then ratified by this House or its precursor is hereby repealed. Article 2, withdrawal from treaty obligations. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, noticing the need for the consent of this House, seeks approval for the withdrawal from several international treaties or interregional treaties as part of the government's Open and ADIA policy. The Ministry will update the House on the progress of these treaty withdrawals within 1 week of the passage of this Act, and this House mandates the government to conduct a full review of all Canadian interregional treaty obligations, sanctioning the withdrawal or renegotiation of such agreements forthwith.
Yes.
I was just going to give a brief summary. In summary, this bill aims for us to more or less, in regards to Article 1, we've departed the Assembly of Regions, and as such, our interregional agreements should reflect this, and therefore there's no need for us to continue to pursue the interregional treaties which we ratified as part of the AOR. And the second article is basically just a part of our commitment to creating a better INADIA as far as foreign affairs as part of our open INADIA doctrine, I suppose you could say. And as such, we would be working to remove ourselves from many of the previous agreements and treaties that have been signed for the sake of a better and more diplomacy-friendly INADIA.
Mm-hmm.
Can I?
Okay. Yes, I actually, in this case here, I wish to know, first of all, before I give floor to the Prime Minister of the nation, Mr. Cheshire, what is the point of your query?
I have a question for the Secretary of State.
You have a question for the Secretary of State. I'm indeed very interested to hear the actual question, and I will conclude if the Secretary of State wishes to actually respond to the question. Mr. Cheshire, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As pointed out in the bill, the Act requires that this House approve the withdrawal from several international treaties as part of the government's policy. Whilst I agree with that, I would like to ask the Secretary of State if he could, either at this moment in time or within the next 24 hours, provide the House with the treaties in question, as I do not think it is appropriate for the House to vote on a blank check to withdraw from international treaties, but rather this House should be voting with regards to specific treaties that the government wishes to withdraw from.
Thank you. Before I give away to the Prime Minister, I see you clearly there. I wish to actually hear the opinion of the Secretary of State, unless you want to delegate your response to the Prime Minister.
I will so delegate my response to the Prime Minister, as I am a little busy right now.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respond to the member's query that the government is talking about treaties that are somewhat defunct but remain in law. For example, the Custody EU Treaty remains in legal force despite the Ration of Custody having severed foreign affairs relations with Inadia. The bill quite clearly mandates the government to conduct a review and inform the House, and to renegotiate agreements where appropriate. This is not a blank check, the member seems to imply. This is called cleaning up Inadia's foreign affairs portfolio, ensuring we have embassies with regions that matter, and ensuring that Inadia remains relevant on the international stage with friendly and open politics. The Open Inadia policy is a flagship policy of this government, and this government believes that we can build a new Inadian relation set with new regions and old regions alike. We are of the view that we can clean up mistakes made in the past or prevent mistakes being made in the future. The Open Inadia policy is central to achieving that, and the renegotiation of international treaties and the withdrawal of existing obligations from defunct treaties is absolutely paramount in ensuring the Inadian constitution, the Inadian laws, and of course Inadia's general foreign affairs is administered in a rightly, as my colleague the Secretary of State pointed out, in an efficient, effective, and clean manner that speaks well of our region. I disagree again with the member's comment that this is a blank tick. This government is about building an Inadia that is fit for all Inadians, and that means a strong foreign affairs portfolio.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I believe that you've concluded your response, correct?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Speaker.
All right, it's totally fine. Now, in this case here, I would like to just point out in this case here that there is no need to raise our voices in this Parliament, in this House. I believe that we can make our points made aware by all members, and this is direct to all members of the House, that you can actually make your points in a much more appropriate and, gentle way. With that being said, I am aware that I see the Right Honourable Member Helvetori is typing as well, and Mr. Raven is actually typing the response. Mr. Raven, have you concluded basically your response in this case? Should I read it? Okay. Right Honourable Helvetorius, absolutely, I will give you the ability and the floor to actually speak. You can type in your response and I'll be reading later on. Before we move to actually to Mr. Cheshires, do you have to make a comment or respond to the Prime Minister, Right Honourable Member Cheshire?
Respond to the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker.
Is it going to be a response ending with a question, or is it going to be a direct response?
It should be a direct response, Mr. Speaker. However, the Prime Minister is within his rights to respond to my statement.
Could I just add, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to come back to the point raised by Old Ravenwood because I have a response to that.
Yes, I will proceed. Let me read it first of all, please. I just need to actually bring Mr. Helvetorius' opinion on the floor, and actually their feedback where they're asking the Right Honourable Member Cheshire to lower the volume of their microphone as it is a little bit too loud, and I agree with that. With that being said, I will be reading and quoting directly the order, please. The Right Honourable Member Old Ravenwood, they say that they understand that we may not be members of the AOR anymore at this time, but I would like to suggest that instead of repealing legislation such as the OPA Act, we amend it to a non-AOR context to ensure that it benefits of a more open borders, trade and communication remain intact with our allies, even though our membership in the AOR does not. In that case there, the Prime Minister had a response, and the floor is yours. This will be the final... Sorry, order, please. In this case, this will be the final response to this specific topic, which will be moving up to a vote, so we can conclude today's session. Thank you.
I, of course, thank the honourable member, my friend Old Ravenwood, for his input here. I would stress to the member that it is important that Inadian policy reflects Inadian values. Now, the AOR One Passport Act that is currently in law in Inadian legislation grants free rights and passage of immigration and citizenship requirements to AOR citizens, as the AOR passed an upgrading directive that this House has not yet approved in regard to that act. We are not under the authority of the Assembly of Regions, and this Parliament is therefore sovereign. And the people of Inadia have elected this House to represent them. It is therefore imperative that a legislation that grants foreign obligations from this House to citizens of other regions be redressed immediately. It is the view of the government, quite rightly so, and my friend the Secretary of State for the Home Department stressed this in Cabinet not so long ago, that as long as we have regulations in place that give citizens of other regions who do not have direct agreements with Anadia rights within Anadia, that is inappropriate. Yes, any person who comes to Anadia who live, work, and participate in Anadia, if you will, becomes an Anadian resident and an Anadian citizen covered under Anadian law. But when someone who has no connection whatsoever with Anadia in a previous AOR region, because our membership has terminated, essentially you are giving them the rights of our citizens, all but the bar the right to vote, if you keep this legislation in force. There is no way this legislation can be amended without seeking inter-regional agreements between our partners. Now, this government is not really willing to establish an open borders cross-regional work network outside of some existing treaties that we have with partner regions outside of the AOR, like the New Western Empire, for example. We have a treaty in place that establishes that cooperation. However, the AOR One Passport Act is a piece of legislation that might have worked well within the AOR in the context of an independent sovereign Anadia is simply not fit for purpose and cannot be amended as such. I commend the statement of the House.
Thank you. Finally, because I want to be as fair as I can with all members and honorable members of this House, Mr. Cesar had a question towards the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister's final response, if they choose to respond to the actual comment, will be the final one for today's session, and we'll be moving to a vote towards the third piece of legislation that we have presented to us. Mr. Cesar, the floor is yours, and please, as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say to the Prime Minister, I am not in any way opposed to the open Anadia policy. However, I believe that that this House should have the specific details of the treaties which the government seeks Anadia's withdrawal from made known to them, rather than the bill being quite vaguely worded, in which case it simply says that, noting the need for consent, it simply seeks the approval for withdrawal from several international treaties as part of the government's policy. As far as I'm aware, the government policy does not specify the treaties which it wishes to withdraw from, and that is why I'm asking either the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State to simply clarify to the House specifically which treaties it is seeking the withdrawal from.
I will respond.
I wish to make the following motion, and actually in this case here maybe a compromise to the House of Commons. Instead of actually going back and forward to actually responding, maybe we can push the actual voting of this specific bill maybe perhaps to a later day, either earlier tomorrow in the morning, let's say, and we can have a written verbal response by the company institutions as to what bills they're referring to and what agreements and treaties they're referring to, so we can actually conclude today's session. Mr. Prime Minister, you wish to respond?
Yeah, I'll respond to both points. The government wishes the legislation to be passed tonight so we can get on with the review. The bill is very, very clear where it says, and I quote, that the Ministry will update the House of the progress of the treaty withdrawals within 1 week of the passage of the Act. The House mandates to conduct a full review of Canadian international treaty obligations sanctioning the withdrawal and renegotiate such agreements forthwith. It's vital that the government be able to act within executive purview under prima facie, as stated in the Canadian Constitution. It is not for this House to conclude treaty obligations. This House ratifies treaties. The government simply has the ability, as it is, to negotiate treaties. This House is a ratification of those treaties under prima facie. So I would say to the member that in asking that the government present which treaties it intends to withdraw from before a full review is taken place would not only be premature, but it would also essentially tie the hands of the government if the government is unable to renegotiate treaties as stated in the purview of the Act. The government possesses this power. The government was not required to ask the House for its consent. The government noted that the House should consent to the open Anadia policy and the review as an act of courtesy. So it says, noting the need for the consent of this House to seek approval for the withdrawal of several international obligations as part of the open Anadia policy. We are seeking the endorsement of the policy from this House so we can go forth and deliver for the citizens. Postponement, Mr. Speaker, is not a question the government is willing to consider this evening, as the government felt that this legislation had been given plenty of time to be debated, but members chose to have a point of order war over a one-line bill, which the member in question then voted abstain on for no apparent reason. I will point out that he asked for extension when the member in question is the reason we have run out of time and why one member's bill may not be debated this night. And the member was quite reasonable and had his bill placed on the order paper with the manager of House Business. So, no, Mr. Speaker, the government is not willing to seek deferral tonight. The government would like this legislation to be voted on tonight, as it was planned to be, so we can get on with delivering for Canadian citizens.
With that being said, as I did state a moment ago, in this case here, the Honourable Member Cheshire has raised their hand and they say that they just wish to thank the Prime Minister for their clarification and have nothing further to add with regards to the legislation. Encourage immediate vote. Thank you. With that being said, I just simply want to express the same feeling at the same time, and the vote is open.
Mr. Speaker, while the vote takes place, the government wishes to note it will give priority to Mr. Helvatorius' bill for the next sitting of the Parliament, so it shall be read first. We think it's unfair that he was not able to present his legislation tonight.
As I did state prior to the plenary session, the actual bill had to be reviewed and made, basically everybody made aware about it. So in that case there it will be a priority to the next plenary session. We have 6 votes so far. We're looking for another one in order to get quorum. Otherwise we will have to actually postpone and we actually reach quorum. Alrighty, well, with that being said, and the minimal quorum has actually surpassed itself. With that being said, the final bill presented by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Kriegs, the Foreign Obligations and Review and AOR Legislation Repeal Bill has actually passed. With that being said, we are concluding today's meeting with 56 minutes of recording, which is going to be a terrible work for my computer to actually handle, but nevertheless, with that, thank you so much for participating, and as always, stay classy.